think by now you guys know that I'm a big fan of American Horror Story. I've mentioned it several times on different episodes, so I think you get the hint, right? Well, I finally sat down and watched the Coven season, and I'm trying to figure out why I put it off for so long. Because now it's like my favorite episode. I just can't get Alex to watch anything with me. But anyway, I love how on American Horror Story they bring real life events into the storyline, even if they do give it a little bit of a twist. Now, it was in the Coven season that we were introduced to Marie Laveau, Madame Delphine Lalaurie, which we did an episode on way back on episode 14 in March of this year, and the Axeman. Well, today we're going to be talking about the Axeman and like his real life crimes.
Triple M Studios proudly presents the Weekend Weird Thoughts, and here's your host, the weirdest one of all, Andrea Lee.
Really thinking about changing that intro, but anyway, if you've watched a American Horror Story Coven, you know that the Axeman was lured into Miss Robichaud's Academy for Exceptional Young Ladies because they weren't playing jazz. They were playing opera music. And when he found the room with the Victrola playing the opera music, his plan was to kill the culprit. Well, little did he know that he had walked into a coven of witches, and that's where he met his demise. Well, like Marie Laveau and Madame Delphine Lalaurie, the Axeman was a real life person, and I'm going to share with you what I have found in my research of him. Now, I had heard of him before that season of American Horror Story, but I never really dug into him to see what he was all about. So I decided to do that this week. Well, from May 1918 to October 1919, the Axeman paralyzed the city of New Orleans and the surrounding areas in fear. His first victims were Italian grocery store owner Joseph Maggio and his wife, Catherine. On May 23, 1918, as they lay sleeping in the apartment above their grocery store, the killer slit their throats with a straight razor and then bashed their heads with an axe. And before he left the scene, the killer took the time to change out of his blood-soaked clothes and left them at the scene. Now, it would seem in their situation that robbery was a motive. I mean, they owned the grocery store. But during the investigation, the police found that money and valuables had been left out in plain sight, untouched. Police found a note written in chalk near the couple's home that read, "Mrs. Joseph Maggio will sit up tonight. Just write, Mrs. Tony." Now, I'm not sure what that was supposed to mean. I never found any more references to that, and it seems kind of cryptic. But anyway, the police questioned several suspects, but they released each of them because there was a lack of evidence. Well, 13 months passed, and he kills another grocer, or he attacks another grocer. His name was Louis Bessumer, and his mistress, Harriet Lowe, and they were attacked in the quarters that they lived in at the back of their store. They were found lying in a pool of their own blood when the store was still closed after what was, a time they would be like normally open. Lewis had been hit with an axe above the temple, and Harriet had been hit with an axe above her left ear. But they were still alive. One man was arrested in the case, but was later released. And one side of Harriet's face was paralyzed from her injury, and 2 months after the attack, she underwent surgery in an attempt to repair it, but sadly she passed away 2 days after the surgery. Now, get this, before she died, she told authorities that she suspected that it was Lewis who had attacked her, so they charged him with murder, and he even served 9 months for it, but he was acquitted when he went on trial for it the next May. Now, on August the 5th of 1918, 28-year-old Mrs. Edward Snyder was laying in bed when she awoke to see a dark figure standing over her. Just imagine how scary that would be. The figure then smashed her head or she smashed her face, sorry, repeatedly. Just after midnight, she was discovered by her husband when he returned home from work. She was also 8 months pregnant. When her husband found her, her scalp was split open and blood was covering her eyes, but somehow she was still alive. And 2 days after she was attacked, she gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Again, someone was arrested as a possible suspect, but they were soon released too. Now, after this attack, the police started putting it together that this attack was related to the one that involved the Maggios and Louis Besummer and his mistress. So 5 days after Mrs. Edward Schneider was attacked, another grocer by the name of Joseph Romano was attacked. Now, his nieces were awakened by the sound of a struggle in their elderly uncle's bedroom. The nieces entered the bedroom to see that their uncle had a serious injury to his head, and they also saw the perpetrator leaving. Mr. Romano was able to walk to the ambulance, but unfortunately, he passed away 2 days later. The good thing is, the nieces were able to provide a bit of a description of who had attacked their uncle. They described him as having dark skin, he was heavy set, and he wore a suit and a slouched hat. Now, just like in the other attacks, the scene was very similar. The place was ransacked, but nothing was taken. The killer used the victim's axes and blades. Windows or doors were chiseled away for him to enter, and the majority of the victims were Italian. Well, as you can imagine, the people of New Orleans was in pretty much panic mode, especially the Italian community, since it just seemed that the Axeman had a taste, if you will, for them. Soon the police were becoming swamped with reports of seeing the Axeman sneaking around in neighborhoods. There was also reports of people finding chisels and axes in their yard. And some people even said that it looked like their doors and windows had been messed with. Now, citizens were determined to protect themselves, and I mean, they should, you know. They started carrying loaded shotguns, and people started taking, like, shifts, like, watching over their families while they slept. So, you know, they were doing what they could on their end, you know, to keep their lives, their homes, their families protected. Well, after a few months of no attacks, people started to relax. But by March 10th, 1919, the Axeman was back at it. Screams were heard coming from the Cortimiglia family home in the early morning hours of that day. Now, Charles Cortimiglia was a grocer. He, his wife Rosie, and 2-year-old daughter Mary lived across the Mississippi River from New Orleans in a town called Gretna. A neighbor by the name of Lorlando, and he heard screams coming from the home, so he ran across the street to see what was going on. When he got there, he found that all three members, I can't talk today, and I'm just going to go ahead and apologize. 3 members of the Cortimiglia family had been attacked, all 3 of them, okay? So Rosie had awoken, and she found her husband being attacked by a man with an axe. Now, Charles, the husband, he fell to the ground. Well, then the Axeman turned his attention to Rosie, who happened to be holding little baby Mary. Well, Rosie begged for their lives to be spared, but apparently the Axeman was unmoved by her pleas, and he attacked both of them. Now, when Mr. Giordano, which is the neighbor that was across the street, when he arrived, Charles was laying in a puddle of blood while Rosie stood holding her deceased daughter in her arms. Both Rosie and Charles were rushed to the hospital and treated for skull fractures. Charles was released after 2 days, but Rosie stayed in the hospital under the care of doctors, and when she came to, she told police it had been Mr. Giordano and his 18-year-old son, Frank, who had attacked them. Orlando and Frank Giordano were arrested despite the fact that Orlando's health would have kept him from being able to commit such a crime, and Frank was too large to fit through the panel in the back door where the perpetrator had came through. Now, Mr. Cortimiglia disagreed with his wife's claims, but The two were still charged with murder and found guilty. Frank was sentenced to be hanged, while his father was sentenced to life in prison. And after the trial, Rosie and Charles divorced. And a year later, Rosie claimed that she only accused the Giordano's out of jealousy and spite, and she reversed her claim. Because her testimony was the only evidence against them, they were released from jail shortly after. So again, the New Orleans area was living in fear, and people started arming themselves again. Now, the police claimed that all of the attacks had been carried out by the same person, who was a, quote, bloodthirsty maniac filled with a passion for human slaughter, end quote. 4 days after the Cortamiglias had been attacked, a newspaper received a letter that promised another attack. That letter read, "Dear esteemed mortals, they have never caught me, and they never will. They have never seen me, for I am invisible, even as the ether that surrounds your earth. I am not a human being, but a spirit, and a demon from the hottest hell. I am what you Orleanians and your foolish police call the Axeman. When I see fit, gosh, I am sorry, y'all. When I see fit, I shall come and claim other victims. I alone know whom they shall be. I shall leave no clue except my bloody axe, besmeared with blood and brains, of he who I have sent below to keep me company. If you wish, you may tell the police to be careful not to rile me. Of course, I am a reasonable spirit. I take no offense at the way they have conducted their investigations in the past. In fact, they have been so utterly stupid as to not only amuse me, but His Satanic Majesty, Francis Joseph, etc. But tell them to beware. Let them not try to discover what I am, for it was better that they were never born than to incur the wrath of the Axeman. I don't think there is any need of such a warning, for I feel sure the police will always dodge me, as they have in the past. They are wise and know how to keep away from all harm. Undoubtedly, you Orleanians think of me as a most terrible murderer, which I am. But I could be much worse if I wanted to. If I wished, I could pay a visit to your city every night. At will, I could slay thousands of your best citizens, for I am in a close relationship with the angel of death. Now, to be exact, at 12:15 earthly time on next Tuesday night, March 19th, 1919, I am going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I am going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well, then so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is some of you people who do not jazz it on Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe. Well, as I am cold and crave the warmth of my native Tartarus, and it is about time I leave your earthly home, I will cease my discourse, hoping that thou wilt publish this, that it may go well with thee. I have been, am, and will be the worst spirit that ever existed, either in fact or realm of fancy. And it was signed the Axeman. Well, as you can imagine, on the night of March 19th, every home was blaring jazz music. Every dance hall was filled to capacity, and bands played jazz at parties in hundreds of homes. No one was killed that night, and for several weeks after that, all was quiet, but people were still living in fear. Then, it was August of 1919, the Axeman struck again. The victim this time was Steve Boca, who was also a grocer. Wonder what he had against grocers. But anyway, he awoke to a dark figure appearing over his bed. He suffered from a strike to the head with an axe, but he survived. When he regained consciousness, he ran to his neighbor's house to get help, but he lost consciousness again and collapsed. He was treated for his injuries, but he couldn't recall the details of his attack. During the investigation, police found that nothing had been stolen, and a panel on his back door had been chiseled, just like all the rest. Now, in September of that same year, a pharmacist named William Carson fired several shots at an intruder that was believed to be the Axeman, and all that was left behind was an axe and a broken door. The next day, a young lady by the name of Sarah Lawman was attacked with an axe while she slept. She lived alone, and somebody, one of the neighbors, hadn't seen anything out of her, so they went to check on her, and she was found unconscious in her bed, missing a couple of teeth, and suffering from a severe head injury. She did suffer a concussion, but she survived. And all that was found was a bloody axe in her front yard. Now, the Axeman's last attack came almost 2 months later. I do apologize. On October 27th, another grocer named Mike Pepitone was killed. His wife heard a commotion and walked into the bedroom door just in time to see a large man carrying an axe fleeing from the scene. Like the other victims, Pepitone had been struck in the head, and like the times before, nothing was stolen and the usual clues were left behind. And just like magic, the Axeman disappeared. Police continued to work on the case, but they were never able to solve it. Now, there was no fingerprints left behind. Any of the suspects that had been questioned had been cleared, and there was no distinct description of the man that they were looking for. Even historians have taken a stab at trying to solve this cold case, but they've all came up empty. Now, one thing they all agree on, though, is that the Axeman probably didn't write that letter that I had read earlier. Now, what do you think? Do you think he wrote it? In my opinion, I don't really think he did. I think it was just some weirdo trying to frighten the people in that area more than they were already frightened. I just find it odd that no one was ever arrested, and he would just stop murdering like that. Maybe he was murdered, or maybe he was breaking in on somebody and they shot him, and I don't know, maybe hit his body or something. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot that could have happened, but those are just my opinions. But anyway, that's all I have today about the Axeman. I appreciate you guys tuning in and being such loyal listeners. Don't forget to come back Monday for a whole new episode of Mystery, Murder, and Magic. It's going to be a good one. And y'all have a good rest of your day.